All right. Well, I'm delighted to be here, as I always am. One of the nice things about the IEC is that the conferences are never in shabby places. No, they choose well. And so I'm the food trends guy, and I'm sort of intrigued just tracking global food trends, which are sort of circular and sometimes counter-circular. So, for example, at the moment, it's, if I look around the world, let's take something like wheat-based food products. In countries which in history have been great consumers of wheat-based food products, the US, Europe, you see flour consumption actually declining, in part driven by concerns about gluten, for example. Whether they're real concerns or not is another matter. It doesn't matter if people think that they're gluten intolerant, then that's real to them. So flour-based products going down in the Western world, if you will, but actually going up, not least in Asia, where they're substituting wheat-based products for rice, for example. Or let's go to, back to North America in particular, where you see the rise of interest in what people refer to as ancient grains. So quinoa, chia. I mean, now you can't hold your head up in polite company if you're not eating quinoa on a regular basis, or even millet, whereas in countries where in history they've eaten quinoa, chia, millet, they're dropping that and moving towards wheat. So it's intriguing. What I'm going to talk about in a minute is about plant-based products, and so that's plant-based protein in particular. But what's happening to meat protein? If you look around the world, meat protein demand is growing by about 2% per annum. Is that right across the world? No, because in most Western countries, meat consumption per person is at best static, but in most cases actually declining. So where's the growth coming from for meat protein? Almost all of it out of Asia. So about 90% of total global growth in meat consumption comes from growth in meat consumption in Asia, but not, of course, all Asia. So in Japan, we put in the same category as Western countries, where meat consumption is actually just declining. So let's get into meat protein, get into my presentation. And I guess what I wanted to say to start off, look, I'm starting with a Western mindset, but then I get into stuff which is more sort of global later. And this is perhaps a bit exotic, but if I think back to in August 1973, that's 37, like 44 years ago, myself and my wife emigrated to Canada. And as we arrived in Canada in 1973, we had to find a supermarket, and our supermarket of choice, the Canadians will remember it, was a supermarket called Dominion. And Dominion stores had a very irritating jingle that they played everywhere, on every radio station, on every TV station, and it was about mainly because of the meat. And what was that about? It was that people would select their supermarket on the basis of their perception of how good the quality and how good the value was of the meat, and specifically of the beef. So it's mainly because of the meat, actually mainly because of the beef. So that was the overwhelming important product where you'd choose supermarkets. Now let's go forward to 1992 in the US. And in the US, the American Cattlemen's Association had an astonishingly successful campaign to promote beef. And it was, the strapline is beef. It's what's for dinner. So that was, kids would say, Mum, what's for dinner? And what they were looking for, it's beef. And you think that was in the 1990s. Now, that sounds so wonderfully old-fashioned. If you ask Mum, what's for dinner? She doesn't say beef. She's much more likely to say Chinese, or Italian, or what else have I got here? Pasta, or takeaway. So, what's my point here? That the centrality of meat in the Western diet has slipped over time. Doesn't mean we become vegetarian, but everything does now not just center on the plate of meat. And as I mentioned, if you look at the millennial group, so what are the millennials? Millennials are that pesky group of consumers who are between 20 and, let's say, 32 years, they're much more likely to say, not, what's for dinner? They'll say, what's dinner? What's dinner? We don't have dinner. And what do millennials have? Well, they say, we eat when we're hungry. And that might be a mini meal or a snack. And it could be a healthy snack. It doesn't have to be a bad thing. Nutritionists don't like this. But the whole pattern of 3 meals a day is breaking down, not least for that group. So that's a big change. What else is happening demographically, particularly in higher income countries? Next. So I've taken, here's a selection of countries. Some of them are represented here. And let's take the UK. And what happened if we went back to last year? So in 2016, last year, of all the meals eaten in the UK in 2016, 40% were eaten by one person alone. So that's like solo eating. And then another roughly 40% of all meals eaten in 2016 were eaten by 2 people. So that means 8 out of 10 meals in the UK in 2016 were consumed by either one person or 2 persons. So gone are the days of, a family of 4 sitting down and having a tidy meal together. I mean, we might like to think that still happens, but no, it's changing. But so what? Is that just sort of polite, interesting cocktail conversation, or might it have some implication for the food industry? I think it has huge implications. So if 40% of people are eating a meal alone, how might that be translated into, say, food buying behavior? What do you think? What would happen? Do you think they go home and invest an hour in making a sensible stew? No. If they did, it would take them all week to eat it. They're much more likely to eat out, for example. Or if they eat at home, they may well buy something which is close to a meal to take home. Rather, remember when we used to go to the supermarket to buy things, I'll use an old term here which younger ones won't really understand. We used to go and shop for things that we used to call, see if you understand it, ingredients. And now we don't shop for ingredients, for goodness sake. We either shop for the meal or for meal components, and then you go sort of boop, 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 I've cooked. That's it. That's my meal, and I've cooked it, and I'm proud of it. So it's that move towards convenience, which has huge implications for us, for anybody in the food industry. So what's all this business about plant-based foods? And in my professional career over, say, the better part of, 40 plus years, I've never seen such a megatrend in terms of consumers' increasing interest in plant protein rather than other forms of protein. And what do I say here? It's a fundamental shift in how people look at their plates. It's not about replacing meat. The world isn't suddenly becoming vegetarian. It's about broadening the healthy eating repertoire. And I think there are huge implications for us in the meat industry. So let me give you, I'll give you some examples in a minute, but this is just, if you track new products food products launched around the world over the last very few years, what you see is this enormous growth in plant-based products, plant-based proteins. And what are they like? I mean, some of them mimic meat. So here we go. Here's Impossible Foods. This gets lots of media attention. It's raised a whopping $180 million in venture capital, not least from influential people like Bill and Melinda Gates, Li Ka-shing out of China, to produce something that looks like, tastes like, smells like, feels like a burger or a cheeseburger. And actually this particular company is just scaling up. They're going mainstream with this product, and they're focusing initially on the restaurant. What's General Mills? General Mills, a major food company around the world, sees it as being sufficiently exciting that they've bought into this. A competitor to Impossible Foods is Beyond Meat. And here we are. Here's, again, a plant-based product which mimics a burger. It's available through Whole Foods, And again, look, here's Tyson. I mean, you'll know Tyson, for goodness sake, and one of the largest meat producers in the world, has just bought into Beyond Meat for the Beyond Burger. And what I see right around the world is that increasingly meat companies believe they have to broaden their definition of protein to go well past just meat protein. Here we are with Hormel. Hormel is an international food company. Spam, of course, famously in history. And big meat is increasingly taking interest and ownership in plant-based companies. It's sort of intriguing. This isn't a sort of minor fad. This is a huge trend. And if I look in increasingly, let's take European markets, some of you will know the product corn. I mean, corn is a mycoprotein. You ferment it, you grow it. It's mushroom-like, and in its best forms, it mimics chicken. And what's more, it's pretty cheeky too. Here we are, corn chicken fillets, but they're meat-free chicken fillets. How can you be that? You know, I'm amazed the chicken industry hasn't had at them to get them to change. I mean, you can't call something chicken fillets if it's not chicken, I would have thought. Does it get any coverage in my market? Here we go. I was shopping or just going around supermarkets last week in London. Huge. I mean, there's as much corn in this display cabinet as there was chicken. So has it got traction in the market? Absolutely. Who's it owned by? Who's corn owned by now? By the Philippine company Monte. And why did they pay the better part of $1 billion for this company? Because they believe it has real potential in Asia as a meat substitute, if you will. If you can get the volume up, they can get the price down. So we see a sort of huge diversification of meat substitutes of one sort or another. It's sort of intriguing, isn't it? That some don't want to eat meat, but they want to eat things that look like meat. I don't fully understand that. What's all that about? Here we go. But it's more than meat substitutes. Again, in my market, if you look at the increasing interest in vegetable-based meals. Here's one using lentils, and you don't have to talk to, say, Indians about lentils, huge consumers, but here we've got just a great movement towards, in my market, so the example is Sri Lankan lentil sambar. It's saying, here's really tasty vegetable-based meals that are increasingly in vogue. Actually, it coincided with the very successful 2016 International Year of the Pulses. So from a Western economy point of view now, you can be a vegetarian without having the hair shirt of, if you were a vegetarian in the 1970s, then you were doomed to consume sort of appalling, gritty soy burgers or awful nut roasts. Now there's just a great selection of very tasty vegetable-based products. And in the UK, I see this wherever I go. I was at Earl's Court Tube Station again last week. Here's Sunita's Secret Veg Meatballs. So this is no meat meatballs, if you will. A great expansion. And we see this move towards a flexitarian diet. So what's a flexitarian diet? It's, look, in my particular case, I can put my hands up, I'm a vegetarian. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm a vegetarian. Well, I'm a vegetarian every second Thursday. And then, of course, I don't count bacon. I think you've got to put bacon in a special category that you're allowed to eat it whenever you want to. In that regard, it's how I view wine in an aeroplane. I don't sort of count it in my consumption. It's something that's been given to me personally by God. And so I don't have to count it in my units. So here we are. It's a flexitarian diet where people elect to have, through the week, to drop a meat meal and have a vegetable-based meal. That doesn't mean they're becoming vegetarian, not in the least, but they're doing it. Why they're doing it? For health reasons. They may even be doing it for economy reasons. And we've seen some brilliant products. Here's Flexilicious Super Sausages, which essentially are half meat and half vegetables and pulses. And you can't tell a difference. You really can't. They're higher fiber, lower fat, Do I think they've got market traction? I think they're going to do really, really well. Here on the left here, lean and bean, which is minced beef, but mixed with haricot beans. And again, use that in an Italian dish, in a meatballs, or whatever it might be. You can't tell. You do not know. It is not 100% meat. What's that attractive? Who would be attracted to that? Mums. Mums who want to up their children's vegetable intake, but on a stealthy basis. So this is stealth veg, and I think it will do really well. High veg, again, this movement towards, and just moving a little bit towards the dairy end, it's sort of intriguing in most developed countries, higher income countries, the dairy department in any supermarket, the only area of growth in dairy, the only area, is in non-dairy dairy. Yeah, so it's milks which are not dairy-based. And, is this just, again, a little whim? Well, don't tell that to Danone, who've paid out $12.5 billion US to buy White Wave. And White Wave owns Alpro, which is probably the best known non-dairy dairy drink, with their almond milk, oat milk, coconut milk, soy milk, etc. It's huge. It's huge. And of course, it's not just in milk. This transfers into yogurts, which again are non-dairy based. What we're seeing is right across the US in particular is startup companies who see opportunities in this area. So these will be, again, investors, young investors, probably millennials, probably people in their late 20s, who are launching products. This one here is Rebel Kitchen, which is available across Europe and in North America. And again, it's, Choco milk, but it's milk with a Y, so it's milk based on coconuts. And they're really chasing big food. They're just giving a walloping to big food. Another example, Sneaks Organic, where they're sneaking vegetables into milkshakes, sneaking them into yogurts, etc. And again, much loved by mothers who are trying to, again, trying to get their kids to get somewhere near their 5-a-day target, which most people don't. Pea milk. I didn't know peas had milk, but there we go. Here's Ripple. Strong consumer products, interest in food products which are naturally free from. Brown rice drink, oat drink, hemp drink. I thought you smoked it, not drank it, but there we go. That's another matter. And again, is this a fad? I was completely intrigued in my own country, in the UK, that plant-based milks have been added to the UK Consumer Price Index. They've become such a routine purchase by so many people that they're considered just, everybody, so we better put them into the Consumer Price Index. These are not little niche products. They're full-time products. So who else is into protein? Why am I talking about this? Because eggs, protein, synonymous. But I think increasingly you've got competitors, and not least from the dairy industry. Here we are, dairy products positioned to take advantage of the protein trend. So if we take Arla, Arla is farmer-owned dairy company from Denmark, Sweden, and the UK, and here's their protein, 20 grams. So this is whey protein in, say, Greek yogurt, and they're focusing particularly at males, saying if you want to up your protein intake, and it doesn't have to be meat or eggs for that matter, it can be dairy. So consumers express a strong preference for food and drink products that are intrinsically healthy. They don't want food products where you've taken the bad stuff out or put bad stuff in. They're saying we prefer if it starts with just the good stuff. And I would suggest that gives you an advantage. I mean, from a fresh egg point of view, you're not taking anything out or putting anything in. You actually might put something in terms of feed, if you would say on omega-3, but in general, whatever's there is there, and that's perceived very positively by consumers. Last week I was in Canada, and again, looking at protein, there's huge developments in the prairie provinces in Canada, and we can see Warburton's, which is the #1 baker of bread in the UK, working with CIGI, which is the Canadian International Grains Institute, where they are putting pea protein into bread and selling bread on the basis of its high protein content. Okay, so I want to increase my protein consumption. I don't want to eat more meat. How else can I do it? I could eat more eggs, or, here they're saying, just have a slice of bread, which is high in protein. So, as I mentioned last week, I was sort of covering this area. In the last 6 months, there's been just under $1 billion worth of investment gone into the prairie provinces in the areas here. So, for example, the world's biggest pea processing plant coming to Portage la Prairie in the prairies, Moose Jaw in Saskatchewan. What else do I see? Maple Leaf, which is an iconic food company in Canada, going out and buying plant-based protein group Light Life from the US. There's a lot of this about. It's not just a little mini trend. And if we're talking protein, let's not forget insect protein. I mean, that's another sort of interesting circular and anti-circular trend. So in Asia, in many Asian countries, for millennia, insects have been eaten one way or another as food. In Thailand, for example, they have in history and to this day, they're very popular. So if you take stir-fried crickets with black pepper, soy sauce, and they're used as a snack when particularly boys are drinking beer. And it's been a student snack for just generations. Actually, they're now showing less interest in that as they buy more chips. So Lay's, PepsiCo's Lay's chips as snacks, whereas in, say, Manhattan, it's increasingly fashionable to eat insect-based protein. However, I think the future for insect protein is much more likely to be in livestock feed. I mean, I assume through time, if we look 5, 10, 15 years down the road, that increasingly insect protein will be fed to chickens, will be fed to pigs, and will be fed in aquaculture. They're so prolific. I mean, you don't have to wait 9 months for a cricket to have a baby. You know, like it's a long weekend it can produce. So, you know, watch that space in terms of protein usage in your industry, I would suggest. Now, closer to you would be, here we are, plant-based Jess Mayo. So you've got a company, Hampton Creek. It's producing a product which they called Jess Mayo. So it's mayonnaise, and it's made from pea protein. How much egg is in it? No egg. 0 egg. So, back in November 2014, Unilever decided to sue Hampton Creek because they said if you're selling something which is called Jess Mayo, by definition, it must have eggs in it. Now, why would Unilever be interested? Well, Unilever own Hellmann's, which is the largest mayonnaise brand in the world. And I thought back in November 2014, it'd be interesting to see how Unilever do. 2 months later, they withdrew the suit, and then in February 2016, Unilever launched their own eggless mayonnaise. You think something's happening out there? It sure is. And I might say that Jess Mayo, or Hampton Creek, has attracted $120 million worth of venture capital over the last 3 years. It's astonishing. Here's another example. Bolthouse Farms is owned by Campbell's. Do we know Campbell's? You know, Campbell's as in Campbell's soup. They're suffering so badly with that old-fashioned product that they've moved into more fresher foods. They bought Bolthouse Farms, and Bolthouse Farms have launched, I pronounce that mayo. So it's a mayonnaise mimic. It's actually made of yogurt plus the special sauces, but it's firmly, again, directed towards the mayonnaise market. It's a competitor to you one way or another. Of course, there are sort of specialty vegan products. Here's vegan egg, whatever that may be, but that's tiny. This is tiny niche stuff. And of course, there are egg replacement products in the processing world. Here we've got no egg replacer, or Gran no egg. But this, I think the strong positive image that there is for eggs at the moment in many countries keeps replacement products largely in the niche, free-from egg allergy market. This isn't a big deal, but still it's growing. And I mean, just getting away from eggs for the moment, I know that makes you uncomfortable if you don't talk about eggs. But I'm sort of intrigued at the level of convenience here. Does anybody spiralize in the audience? Come on, hands up, the spiralizers. No? No, come on, thank you at the back. Yeah, there's no shame in being, and there is counseling, but there's no shame. And what's spiralized? It's when you take traditional vegetables and turn them into pasta, like butternut spaghetti. Here's courgette, carrot spaghetti. And again, is this a little minor fad? I don't think so. When you see the Del Montes of this world moving into vegetable noodles, you know that it's starting to go more mainstream. So the spiralizing trend, it's a huge boost for flagging traditional vegetables, but it eats away at the noodle and pasta guys. You've got to watch it. It's interesting to see where competition comes from. Okay, and cauliflower rice, for goodness sake. I mean, it takes a lot to put a little bit of sort of sexiness into cauliflower, but this seems to be doing pretty well. But back to, what about the meat guys here? As I've shown you that because of this interest in plant-based protein, what impact will it have on meat? It must be a competitive threat. And the other thing about meat is that every single European government is calling for people to reduce their meat consumption. In China, the government is calling for its citizens to reduce meat consumption. Here, the French, who live to eat, they're urging their citizens to cut meat intake in revised guidelines. I mean, let's look at the Dutch. The Dutch aren't a silly nation. We respect the Dutch, and what are their new dietary guidelines? They're saying that their citizens should eat 0.5 kilo of meat per week. Now do the maths. How many kilos would that be a year? Half a week? That might be about 26 kilos a year. How many kilos do you think the Dutch eat a year? It's about the same as the Australians or the Americans or the Argentinians. 120. 120. I mean, I'm amazed the Dutch can afford the time to be at this conference. They should be home sort of remorselessly working their way through another kilo of pork. So, do consumers take any notice of this? Well, not really, but over time, there's constant pressure here saying, for health reasons, and increasing for environmental reasons, you should reduce meat consumption. And here's the Danes. I mean, we respect the Danes. Danish Council on Ethics releases its report, beef is climate-damaging food. I mean, it's interesting, again, from an egg industry point of view, how do you stand in terms of the perception of A, on health, I'll come back to that, but B, on the environment? I think that you have a lighter footprint than some of the proteins, which is, good news for you, I would suggest. And just to finish in this area, not finish my little talk, but I mean, talk about being extreme. Here's discord in Angela Merkel's government after the environment minister bans meat at official functions. As I say, and there she is with her boss, but I mean, clearly she's barking mad. But, when a government minister is banning meat, it's a move, isn't it? It's a move. So there's a lot happening in protein, and it's not in everybody's interest. So, I might have played this one before. Do I think the world is turning vegetarian? Actually, no. No. But the great news here is that vegetarians have much lower sperm counts. Now, I'm a professor, but not really a proper one. And so this isn't a scientific view, but it's my view. And I think, nothing wrong with vegetarians, love them dearly, but, should we worry that the world's going vegetarian? Now, my belief is that over another couple of generations, we'll have bred most of them out. So, brilliant. That's brilliant. Okay, so let's sort of get more eggy. And again, one of the few advantages of age is that you can reflect back over 4 or 5 decades in my particular case and say, so what's eggs standing in terms of consumer understanding on issues relating to health and nutrition? And it strikes me that eggs have done, certainly in markets that I know, have done much better more recently than it had done in the past. So it's not the devil on the right. increasingly eggs have a health halo associated with them, which is sort of pretty good news. Now, I understand that in the session before, there was concern about a program that may be launched on Netflix called What the Health. Now, look, you've got to constantly deal with that. There are extremists. It's very difficult to combat them. You've just got to wait until they shoot themselves in the foot, and eventually they will if they're extremists. But I think you haven't done a bad job. If you go to Australia, giving the egg the health heart tick, it's great that if you've got approval from a trusted medical authoritative source, that means a big deal. Increasingly, if let's say I Google superfoods. Actually, nutritionists hate the whole concept of superfoods. But the fact of the matter is, if you Google it, you'll get league tables of superfoods. This is the last one I looked at again out of Australia. I was in Australia recently, so that's why. And what's up there? Well, eggs are perceived as a superfood. Brilliant. I mean, are they? Well, they're a good food. Most food is good, but just get some leverage. You see quinoa has sneaked in at number 1. It's encouraging to see, Lee, that kangaroo managed to get in at number 10. It wouldn't be popular necessarily in Iceland, but there we go. But in my own market, if you went back just last year, November 2nd, why eggs really are good for you, having just one a day reduces the risk of having a stroke by 12%. When I saw that, it got coverage on every paper in that week. An egg a day can cut chances of suffering a fatal stroke. I thought, wow, what a long way we've come with eggs and its health perception in a relatively short time. I think that's sort of brilliant. However, it's not without its problems. Here's probably the best known branded egg internationally, the Happy Egg. And it's a UK issue, and you'll have talked about it, I'm sure, with each other. Eggs laid by hens temporarily housed in barns for their welfare. So there's an issue here, and I'll come back to it. There's an issue relating to AI, to avian influenza, which I think is very, very dangerous in prospect. But let me come back to that. And I think what I find really encouraging is not just for eggs, but for food in general. And right round the world, increasingly people are saying, who produced it? How did they produce it? Using what? What was their impact on the environment? What was their impact on bird welfare? What was their impact on everything? And so farmers are becoming fashionable. I mean, good Lord, who would have thought farmers would become fashionable? As I say here, mind you, not every farmer should meet an egg consumer. I think you should be careful which farmers you allow to be seen by consumers, because some farmers will put the fear of God into lots of consumers, Lee, in particular. Yeah. So, but I see it's not just eggs. It's wherever I go. I was in New Zealand relatively recently. Was working with Zespri. Zespri is the producer, exporter of kiwi fruit in New Zealand. And I was talking to their sales and marketing director, who'd just come back from a sales visit to major supermarkets in the US to whom they were exporting kiwi fruit. And I said, how did it go? And he said, it went real well. I said, made a bit of a mistake. I took him. And he pointed to a guy who was having a coffee just around the corner. I said, well, who's he? He said, he's a grower, producer, director of Zespri. And I said, why was it a mistake? He said, well, nobody wanted to talk to me. They wanted to talk to the farmer. And so they were in major meetings with the Krogers of this world. The farmer was introduced, and he would meet and say, you produce kiwi fruit? Yeah. How do you do that? It's a vine. I didn't know it's a vine. I mean, people want to know about food, where it was produced, how it was produced, the ingredients, all the way back now. When they buy processed food products, they want few ingredients, and ones they can pronounce, and ones that they perceive are natural and are real. And that's a great opportunity in the egg industry, I would suggest. Now on the more sort of dismal side, so as I always do, on Saturday I was here, and I went down, that's the flag of Monaco, I went to Carrefour, and there's the egg category. That's your product in the major supermarket in Monaco and in France. Do you think it's designed to stimulate shoppers? Is it appalling or what? as I've shown before, I mean, I found the other side of that picture, there were people sleeping in front of the egg category. It induced sleep. And just look at your competitors, other food products. So in that same supermarket, up on the right, that was them selling meat. There was a butcher. There was theatre. There was colour. Down the bottom was the fish counter. Fish counter. There was a fishmonger. There was excitement. Look at the zing associated with their fresh produce. This is the same supermarket, and then that's your product. That is repeated right round, particularly the Western world, and it's awful. And it becomes an issue for you. Where would I go to learn about how to merchandise, how to retail eggs? I'd go to Asia. They just understand how to put a bit of theatre in it. Just before Christmas, I was in Hangzhou, in a Walmart, not a Walmart, and can you imagine 32 linear meters and 4 shelves of eggs? Is that impressive or what? That's 120 meters of eggs, dozens of egg products. Cheap ones, expensive ones, gifts, the works. You go to Asia to look how if you're a Western person, how we should be selling eggs. There's much to learn. Don't go to the US, don't go to the UK, don't go to Australia, don't go to Europe. No, go elsewhere. I think that's just brilliant. Okay, just to finish, hope I'm on time. So what's my take out of all this? Look, the consumer view on protein is broadening. It was all about meat, essentially. A little bit about eggs, but it's broadening into plant-based proteins, about other proteins, and I think that's good news for eggs. It's threatening for red meat, but actually, in higher income countries, as their view broadens, I think there are some increasing opportunities for premium protein products. That there are those who want to reduce the amount of food that they're consuming, but when they are in reducing mode, they also want to eat better. And they're willing to pay more for less. And really the challenge is to work out what do they value and pay more for. What's really important, I think, for you guys in many, many markets, not just in developed Western economies, is the 3-meal-a-day structure is evolving, and you need to respond with egg products in snack, mini meal, and meal deal formats. And I don't think you do well at that. You need to do much more. This sort of snacking mini meal, it's a motor and it's accelerating. The egg image is increasingly positive, but I think bird flu is a prospective, very dark cloud. Look, I'm no AI scientist, I know nothing about it. But about 3 weeks ago, I was talking in KL in Malaysia, and it was largely veterinary and technical people there. And all the conversation was about AI, about bird flu. And the big, big worry was that there might at some stage be deaths associated with the transfer of the disease, not from bird to humans, which is happening in some countries where there's been hundreds of deaths, but between human to humans. And if that happened, that would be a big, big, big problem. So there's a dark cloud. Bird welfare will continue to raise very tricky issues. I think you need to capitalize on eggs' natural, simple attributes which are in tune with influential millennial consumer food values. I think they want simplicity, and you can offer them that. And then the last one, just to make my point here, retail merchandising of eggs in Western countries is nothing short of dreadful. Emerging Asia, there's a beacon of better practice. That's the place to go to look for a better way to promote eggs, I would suggest. And I don't want to end on a dismal note. I was just amused the other day. The Global Happiness League table was just announced. And here we go. There's the top 20. I see the UK comes in at number 19. See if you can spot your country. I could only fit 20 on. The US is, because I know we've got Americans here, it comes in at number 14. But then, don't panic, because that was done, I think the survey was done pre-November the 8th. And so, you know, needless to say, my view is that you'll be way up the league table after then. And in fact, one picture sort of captured the euphoria of youth post-November 8th. And thank you for listening. Am I done? Our questions.
Well, David, thank you very much. As usual, you gave an excellent presentation on what's going on around the world. I think very worthwhile to all of us. We still have time for one or two questions. Is there anybody? Yes, at the back of the room here. You have a microphone? Yeah.
I have just one question. I think the answer might be obvious. When you refer to egg protein, are you qualifying them as a plant protein or egg protein, an animal protein, or something in between?
Yeah, I mean, good question. And of course, I'm not that thoughtful. I put them as something in between. You know, you've like meat, eggs, plant. Yet, of course, meat starts off with plant. So, but good point. I mean, I guess the important question would be, how do consumers perceive it?
Yes, on the marketing.
Yeah, yeah. And what do they see it as being? They don't see it as being meat. And for those that are trying to reduce the meat consumption, that's good news. I think it depends where you are in the world. So for those higher income countries with very high meat consumption, where I see meat consumption dropping, I think they see eggs as increasingly being a good alternative to keep their protein levels high at the same time as they reduce meat consumption. I think that's good news for you. I'm not sure about in other countries, but it's sort of interesting too, just you know, on sort of meat consumption growth, because there are parts of the world, as I mentioned, where meat consumption is growing. Not least, the fastest growing meat-consuming countries in the world, but from a very low base, are India and Pakistan. And yet we've got this sort of perception often that, well, aren't Indians vegetarians? Well, no, there's 1.3 billion of them, and they're not all vegetarians. But just going back, I think, to your comment, just look at the impact. India is like China. Whatever change they have in their diet, and let's take eggs, is if Indians elect to eat one more egg each, then that means somebody's got to find 1.3 billion eggs on a sustained basis. And I think, which is sort of brilliant. That's not a big target, is it, to increase by one egg? That's a lot of eggs.
Do we have any other questions for this moment? There's one over there. Yeah. One moment for the microphone, so that can translation. Yeah.
I'm not going to attack.
Thank you so much for this very interesting presentation. On the same kind of question, does the consumer make a difference between the egg white, which may be like a better product, more proteins,
yeah,
faced to the yolk, or for the consumer it doesn't make a difference and then an egg is an egg?
And I think, and the answer is, depends on the consumer. There are those, most don't make a difference. Eggs, that's it. It's eggs, are protein foods, and it's eggs in toto. There are then those who will only want an egg white omelette, but they are the small end of the small, not insignificant end of the market, for sure.
So the splitting of the eggs between yolk and white, maybe not in the near future. I mean,
clearly now there's an opportunity to for egg whites. I see that as being niche, and but still, niche doesn't have to mean small. In big markets, niche it can be big, and in most markets, I mean, let me just generalize the question. that actually I see many commodity markets, you can see it in eggs, breaking down to a succession of different segments or niches. And that's good. It makes business, I guess, more complex, but it presents more opportunities. It presents more opportunities to make better margins along the continuum of egg products. As I said, at the premium end, I see real growth there in all countries that I visit, all countries.
Thank you.
I think yeah, we've one last question, and then we go over to the coffee break.
And then I can accept my egg, and I can. It's a lovely egg.
In the year to come, do you think it'll be more relevant to consumers the eggs as a product or as the way it is going to be produced? I mean, would it be more impacting on the consumers the type of production, like cage-free and so on, or the eggs as a product alternative to other source of protein?
Right. Look, I think it depends where you are and which market. And I'm lucky enough, I spend lots of time in lots of markets, sort of high income and emerging markets. Let's be fair, you go to an emerging market, that's a great egg consumer like Mexico, for example. I would bet that the greatest proportion of that market, people want to buy eggs and they want to buy cheap eggs. And they want cheap egg protein. Doesn't mean that they're nasty people, that they're unconcerned about how it was produced, etc. There's no doubt that is in part of their mind, but they don't have the economic latitude to pay more. They want to just pay less if they can. But I'm often surprised that, in many emerging markets, how quickly that market moves on and where people are asking more questions about production. But it's slightly complex. Let me just, I don't want to go on, but I was in China recently talking to 250 Hangzhou University postgraduate students. And I was talking about food, as I normally do, and talking about animal welfare, the whole concept of animal welfare. And the smartest person in the room was a woman right in the front row, said to me, excuse me, I have a question, said, exactly what is animal welfare? And the room didn't understand the concept of animal welfare. And what was quite clear to me was, in China, what looks like to be concern about animal welfare is concern about food safety. So, free range has got nothing to do with the birds. It's got a lot to do with the perception that free range would be freer of antibiotics, freer of hormones, freer of chemicals. Does that mean that China will not have, will not move into a strong interest in animal welfare? Of course they will. And what's more, it will happen in an accelerated fashion, I would suggest. Thank you.